We caught a car thief and tortured him with kindness until he begged for jail. I was in my garage at 3 in the morning trying to fix my motorcycle's carburetor when I heard the sound of breaking glass coming from across the street. My neighbor Dimitri's BMW had its window smashed, and some guy in a black hoodie was halfway inside trying to hotwire it. I should have called the police immediately, but something about the way he was fumbling with the wires made me think he wasn't very good at this. I pulled out my phone to record him instead, getting clear footage of his face when he looked up. That's when he saw me standing there with my phone out, and his eyes went wide with panic. He tried to run, but Dimitri's elderly dog Winston had wandered out through the open gate and was now blocking the driveway, wagging his tail like this was the most exciting thing that had happened all week. The thief tried to go around Winston, but the dog thought they were playing and kept moving to block him. It would have been hilarious if the guy wasn't actively trying to escape after breaking into a car. I yelled for Dimitri, who came running out in his bathrobe looking confused and angry. The thief was now cornered between Winston, the BMW, and both of us blocking the only exit from the driveway. He held up his hands and started backing away, saying he was sorry and he'd never done this before, which was obviously a lie based on the professional lockpick set I could see sticking out of his pocket. Dimitri looked at me, then at the thief, then at his smashed car window, and I watched his expression change from anger to something I couldn't quite identify. "Call police," he said in his thick Russian accent, but he was smiling in a way that made me nervous. I dialed 911 and explained the situation to the dispatcher, who told me officers were on their way, but it might be 30 to 40 minutes due to a major accident on the highway. 40 minutes was a long time to stand in a driveway with a car thief. That's when Dimitri invited him inside for tea. The thief, whose name we learned was Kyle, looked absolutely terrified when Dimitri insisted he come inside to wait for the police. "It's cold out here," Dimitri said, putting his arm around Kyle's shoulders like they were old friends. "You break my window, least you can do is have tea with me while we wait for police, yes?" Kyle looked at me desperately, like I might save him from whatever this was, but I just shrugged and followed them inside. I was curious now. Dimitri's house was exactly what you'd expect from a 68-year-old Russian immigrant who'd lived there for 30 years. Doilies on every surface, photos of grandchildren everywhere, and a smell of baking bread that never seemed to go away. Winston settled at Kyle's feet, putting his head on the thief's shoe affectionately. This was already the weirdest crime I'd ever witnessed. Dimitri brought over 3 cups of tea and a plate of cookies he'd apparently baked earlier that day. He sat down across from Kyle and looked at him with genuine concern. "So, you are stealing cars now? This is what you do with your life?" Kyle stared at his teacup and mumbled something about needing money. Dimitri nodded thoughtfully and took a sip of his tea. "My grandson, he is about your age. 23, 24 maybe. He also makes bad choices sometimes, but he has family to help him, to guide him back to right path." He pushed the plate of cookies toward Kyle. "You have family?" Kyle's hands were shaking as he reached for a cookie, probably more from nerves than hunger. He admitted his mom lived in Nevada, and they hadn't spoken in 2 years. Dimitri made a disappointed sound with his tongue and shook his head. "This is problem. Everyone needs family. Everyone needs someone who cares if they make mistakes." I was sitting there drinking tea with a car thief and a Russian grandfather having a therapy session at 3 in the morning, wondering if I'd fallen asleep in my garage, and this was all a weird dream. Dimitri asked Kyle about his life, his childhood, what had led him to breaking into cars in suburban neighborhoods at 3 a.m., and Kyle, for reasons I still don't understand, started answering honestly. He talked about dropping out of community college, about his ex-girlfriend leaving him, about how he'd gotten into debt with some guys who weren't patient about repayment. The plan was to steal nice cars, drive them to a chop shop in the next county, and get enough money to pay off his debts and maybe start over somewhere else. Dimitri listened to all of this while pouring more tea and offering more cookies, nodding sympathetically like Kyle was describing a difficult day at work instead of multiple felonies. "This is a very sad story," Dimitri said when Kyle finished, "but also a very stupid plan. You know how much Chop Shop pays for stolen car? Maybe $2,000-3,000 if you are lucky, and you risk 10 years in prison for this? The math does not work out, my friend." Kyle looked like he hadn't actually thought about the math before, which honestly tracked with how bad he was at the actual car theft part. When Kyle admitted he'd only had gas station coffee, Dimitri got up and started pulling things out of his refrigerator. "You cannot steal cars on empty stomach. This is definitely why you are doing such a terrible job at it." Within minutes, Dimitri was cooking eggs and sausage at 3 in the morning, humming to himself while Kyle sat at the table looking increasingly confused about his life choices. While Kyle ate, Dimitri started telling stories about his own youth in Russia, about the stupid things he'd done, the trouble he'd gotten into. "I was not always respectable grandfather with nice house and BMW," he said with a laugh. "When I was 20, I also made very bad choices, but I had people who helped me, who showed me there was different path." He leaned forward, looking at Kyle seriously. "Question is not why you steal cars. Question is what kind of man you want to be 5 years from now, 10 years from now?" Kyle stopped eating and just stared at his plate. I could see his jaw working like he was trying not to cry, and that's when everything changed for this car thief in the most unexpected way possible. The rest of the story is linked below or on my channel.